Welcome to the Runway, where we cover current events in crypto, Web3, and tech. It's Wednesday, March 27th. Let's take off. First up, SEC scores big win in lawsuit against crypto exchange Coinbase. So CNBC reports. What is this big win, you may ask? Well, the big win, according to the mainstream media here and CNBC, is that the case is going to go to trial. Part of the case is going to go to trial because the other half of it was dismissed. I'm not sure how this is a big win, just having the case be heard by the judge. I mean, again, this is just an example of bias in reporting, and shame on you, Mackenzie Sigalos and Dan Mangan, because this is not any big win for the SEC, considering the fact that they've lost most of their cases when it comes to crypto in court. So this is just kind of shoddy reporting and framing that is just not accurate. It's just a lie. I mean, they haven't won anything. The case is just proceeding. The judge is just going to hear the case. Shame on them for reporting this in this light. Let's move on here. Parent of FTX victim who lost $130,000 asks judge to go easy on SBF, suggests 6 years in prison versus DOJ's 40 to 50. Interesting. This individual must have recovered a large chunk of their funds, if not all of it, in the bankruptcy estate after the crimes were committed. The price of crypto has gone up, so there's a lot more recovery occurring. Now, do I think that Sam should be in prison for 50 years, despite the fact that he is a schemer and a liar and conducted fraud? Probably not that long. I would say probably somewhere in the middle. This individual was asking for, 6 years in prison or something along those lines. I think maybe 20 years, 25 years with the opportunity to get out on good behavior. When there's no violence involved, there should be more leniency, in my personal opinion, right? Still should go away for a couple decades. That being said, I don't think it's fair to take a non-violent person and put them in jail for their entire life. When you're murdering, raping, and doing those terrible things, I think that then life sentences are warranted. Next up, SingularityNET, Fetch.AI, Ocean Protocol reportedly discussed token merger. The new token would have a fully diluted valuation of $7.5 billion, and a potential deal could be announced as soon as Wednesday. This is something you don't see very often in the crypto space, and we've got these 3 different AI-related teams and protocols talking about doing a coin, or issuing a new token, and merging their teams together. So it would be called ASI. You don't see this very often, but I think it's cool. Crypto exchange KuCoin violated anti-money laundering laws, U.S. charges. The exchange was charged under the Bank Secrecy Act. This crypto exchange KuCoin and 2 its founders were charged with violating anti-money laundering laws by the U.S. federal prosecutors. Homeland Security Investigations Special Agent Darren McCormick called KuCoin an alleged multi-billion-dollar criminal conspiracy. I think that's a little ridiculous. A multi-billion-dollar criminal conspiracy. I think this is just an exchange. They're not even a U.S. company, and I think this is a little over the top. Likely what's going to happen is the same thing with Binance. They will pay a fine, a fee of some sort. They will bend the knee to the U.S. government. They will pay the extortion attempt, and they will move on. Now, I haven't heard any bad things about KuCoin over the years compared to many other exchanges, right? They've been operating for years at this point. They're not a U.S. entity. They don't operate in the U.S. Yes, in the past, maybe they were naive and accepted U.S. customers. And I know since then, they are not accepting U.S. customers anymore. So again, it's the jobs of these agents to go after criminals. It's not companies, and it shouldn't be really companies' jobs to treat everybody as a criminal and act as an investigator into everything, right? We've spoken about KYC AML and my thoughts on it over time. And I think it's largely a negative for business and for society because it basically turns all of these entities into detectives now. It's just not their job, right? It's the job of law enforcement to track these things down. And I believe that when these exchanges are notified that, hey, this transaction or this individual is a criminal, then they can act upon those things. But it really is not their job to do those things. And it's very easy to get around KYC AML. 99% of the criminal activity evades KYC AML. So it's not like it's catching 90% of the bad guys. It's catching like 1% or less of the bad guys. So the cost burden that it inflicts on business is a net negative, and this is really substantiated by the data. This ChatGPT crypto scam is flooding YouTube with actors who don't know what they're reading. This is an interesting little ChatGPT, passive income, MEVbot, all this hype about these different bots I always see. People think money just grows on trees and that they're going to get rich quick with all these schemes. And just like what we've discussed a lot on this show is that there's no free lunch. You're not going to just get rich quick instantly. 99% of the time, you're going to get scammed or lose your money. And, people have to be educated on this. They have to learn through experience, unfortunately. Hopefully, they can track these scammers down and find them and recover the funds. Probably unlikely. But at the end of the day, people need to be responsible for their own decisions. There's no free lunch. Next up, Cathie Wood calls Bitcoin a financial superhighway, reiterates a $1.5 million price target. The ARK Invest CEO said the firm has been looking closely at emerging markets where use cases of the digital asset make her believe that Bitcoin is partly a risk-off asset. I agree with this assessment. Price is going to continue to climb over time. Bitcoin has been the best performing asset in all of human history since 2011 or since its inception. Cathie Wood is just doubling down here. And I do think that it is good for everybody to have exposure to Bitcoin in their portfolio, at the very least as an insurance asset against the status quo and traditional markets, etc. Let's go on to some X Factor takes. Look at some spicy X takes here. Dr. Robert Epstein, he runs the TechWatch Foundation, and he has been on Rogan's podcast. He's been all over making the rounds, kind of talking about big tech and a lot of the insidious things they sort of do behind the scenes, how they manipulate, a lot of propaganda that they push out and how they bias search results. Google, for example, and he's talked about this a lot. If you look at some of his posts, there's this idea and concept of something called an ephemeral experience. In 2016, we preserved 13,000 ephemeral experiences Google uses to shift votes. This year, we preserved more than 1.5 million of them. We caught Google shifting 6+ million votes in the presidential race, and we stopped them from interfering in Georgia. Big tech is the real threat. I do agree here that there is some major stuff going on behind the scenes with some of these big tech companies, especially Google. We've talked about it a lot on this podcast, and it really is very insidious and evil what's occurring behind the scenes. So the TechWatch project, which was started by Dr. Robert Epstein, I believe, you can see in the very small notes they've added here, ephemeral experiences refer to those monetary encounters that we all experience daily when using search engines that briefly impact us before disappearing forever, leaving no paper trail. We've now collected over 80 million ephemeral experiences, holding big tech accountable. Want to learn more about how these work and why they're important? So this user here, Hawken50, says, most people don't get what you mean by ephemeral experiences. TechWatch.org needs to use stronger descriptive language in these posts, and I agree with that. So let's go down the rabbit hole a little bit, and I'm going to tie in a tool that I use daily now instead of Google called Perplexity, and I've talked about it on this podcast before. Let's look at Perplexity real quick on X. It's the world's first conversational answer engine where knowledge begins. Get our iOS and Android apps they have listed here. And they do have a little browser add-on that you can use. I'm just going to go to the website directly, which is Perplexity.ai, and you can just ask it questions, and I have a pro account with Perplexity. This is what it looks like. It does have a library where you can save previous questions, and if you want to start a new thread, you just look at the top left corner, press new thread. You can attach images, text, or PDFs. You can set a focus for your sources, and it will utilize GPT-4 and different AI GPTs, transformer models to answer your question, and you can also change those things in the settings. So let me just throw this out here, and we're gonna ask it a question. What are ephemeral experiences? So it's going to find the sources. Instead of giving you just a bunch of sources, it's actually going to do the research and give you the answer. So you don't have to click through and do a bunch of stuff, which is very interesting, right? And if you want to go back, you can still look at these sources and you can go through them if you'd like. So answer: ephemeral experiences refer to events, interactions, or content that are transient, lasting for a very short time before disappearing or losing their relevance. These experiences are characterized by their brief lifespan and are often designed to create a sense of urgency or exclusivity, leveraging the psychological phenomenon known as FOMO, fear of missing out. Ephemeral experiences can be found across various domains, including digital media, art, marketing, and everyday human interactions. Here are some examples and contexts in which ephemeral experiences are prominent. So digital and social media platforms like Snapchat, Instagram stories, and Facebook stories epitomize ephemeral content in the digital realm. These platforms allow users to post content that disappear for 24 hours, encouraging more spontaneous and authentic sharing while creating a sense of urgency among viewers to engage with the content before it vanishes. It goes on to describe other examples of ephemeral experiences here, but it also leaves out, it doesn't give us yet the answer we're looking for with the context of what the TechWatch Foundation and Dr. Robert Epstein are discussing and talking about when they say ephemeral experiences, right? There's a window to ask a follow-up question. So I'm going to follow up and I'm going to say, what does Dr. Robert Epstein mean when he uses the term ephemeral experiences? And now it's going to add some context here, right? It's going to look at his research, his body of research, and it's going to give me an answer. So Dr. Robert Epstein uses the term ephemeral experiences to describe brief online interactions or content that appear temporarily and then disappear, such as search suggestions, search results, or news feeds. These experiences are powerful because they can influence people's opinions and behaviors without leaving a traceable record. Epstein emphasizes that because these experiences are fleeting and not stored, they cannot be easily reconstructed or analyzed after the fact, which makes them a potent tool for manipulation without accountability. He has been studying these ephemeral experiences and their impact, particularly in the context of search engines like Google and how they can potentially shift voting preferences and opinions on political matters. This is the equivalent of somebody robbing a bank and taking a cloth and wiping away their fingerprints, right? Normally, you would be able to sort of track, and there would be a record of what's happening with the protocol, and you could look at the code base or find the history. With these ephemeral experiences, they are purposely scrubbing them from the internet, and they are deleting any track or record of this. This is very insidious, and this is evil unethical behavior by Google and by many of these big tech companies. There should be some accountability here. What is the value of a big tech company showing certain results to somebody that they know, because especially Google has all of your information, every search result you've ever done. They have a political profile on you. They're, within the algorithm, they know what your leanings are. Are you conservative? Are you liberal? Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? They know what issues are important to you because they have all of your data and history, and they're using that data and history to manipulate you, right? So they know which exactly users to target with a certain voter issue, whether it's election fraud or masking or abortion, any kind of issue. They know what will get you to vote a certain way and what will move the needle, right? Because they have your data, and they know you better than you know yourself, because they have all of your data. They don't need to know exactly what your name is, but they can build a profile on you, and they can push this out as ephemeral experiences. Hey, go vote today. They can put a little pop-up message at the top of your Google search browser. Hey, don't forget, you're in this precinct and we have your data. Don't forget to go down to precinct 627 and vote. Or, hey, we're going to show you this news article today because we know it's going to influence you to do a certain thing, right? Or, hey, when you search a question, instead of actually putting the results there, they're going to push up blogs and propaganda posts from all of the justice warriors in San Francisco that are writing these blogs. They're just basically opinions, and they're going to push that up to the top of the search result. So really what this is these are campaign contributions. If you're giving free exposure to one political side, or you're convincing people to vote, or you're pulling these levers that are doing things, if you would charge a political company to produce ads, what does the things you're doing behind the scenes, what does that constitute, right? So what constitutes a campaign contribution? The TechWatch Foundation, I'm not sure if they've done any lawsuits or anything like that yet, but I think this is really the next step here to get accountability, because again, these ephemeral experiences are stuff they don't want anybody to know, right? They're scrubbing these ephemeral experiences and changing so you can't actually see what happened in the past. And right, so people that have volunteered to work with the TechWatch Foundation and are basically documenting this and recording it via phone or whatever, recording these ephemeral experiences, that if you go back a day after the election and try to get the same thing, you're not going to get the same result, because they've pushed this up and they've given this service to whatever political party. And a lot of times it's the left side of the aisle, mostly the left side of the aisle from what we've seen here. Interesting, right? So a campaign contribution is defined as any gift, subscription, loan, advance, or deposit of money or anything of value made for the purpose of influencing the outcome of an election for public office. This includes not only direct monetary donations, but also in-kind contributions, which are goods and services provided to a campaign without charge or at less than the usual charge. Examples of in-kind contributions include donated office space, volunteer labor, or discounted services. So what is the value of swinging millions of votes in a presidential election? I mean, many can make the argument that the value of that is like billions of dollars, maybe even more. I'm sure they didn't list this on their page of campaign contributions, right? So they've provided a service, an advertising service or a media service or a mass manipulation service, propaganda, and they may think that they're doing it for the right. They may be crying and thinking, hey, we got to do this because this makes the world a better place or whatever. But this is probably the largest political donation of a goods or service that could possibly exist. So what do I think should happen here? Well, I think that the TechWatch Foundation, Dr. Robert Epstein, and if they have the goods and the data, they should produce that, try to assign a monetary value to that, and they should go to court over this. I mean, this is, again, the whole concept of these ephemeral experiences are not reproducible, right? These big tech companies are hiding these things because they know what they're doing is unethical and or illegal, and they know it's evil. So let's get some accountability. Let's move on. Elon posted this. This is Michael Schellenberger. It's all much worse than I thought. The corporate media are all in on government censorship. Over the last 3 years, we have come to learn of the role that our own government officials have played in demanding censorship by social media platforms. Some of this censorship was overt, particularly as it related to COVID. However, some of it was also done in secrecy, as we discovered in the Twitter files. Many of us thought that once we had uncovered the censorship, governments would be sufficiently embarrassed to stop doing it. And to some extent, that has been the case. But now governments around the world are stepping up their efforts to demand more censorship. Last week, the Federal Bureau of Investigation quietly announced it had resumed its outreach to social media companies. Scotland's police could even investigate comedians under a new hate speech law if someone complains about a joke. Major media outlets are currently working with government-funded censorship activists at the University of Washington and Stanford Internet Observatory to demand greater censorship in the name of saving democracy. This is just disgusting. Really, we have turned into this giant technocracy, right? Even if you look at these big tech companies, if you look at the cabinets of who's in the Biden administration after all this happened, I mean, there are tons of Facebook and Google reps and all these people appointed to positions of power. So really what we have is this giant technocracy, which is really a lot of times unconstitutional, this communication and the censorship and all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes, the pressure that's occurring. And a lot of this has gone to court, and the ruling was in favor of curtailing this and calling this out. Let's move on. Legacy media doesn't get views for their own content anymore. Just look at their tanking engagement. So they need to attack influencers for traffic. If you even yell at them, they get paid. So just ignore to the maximum extent possible and let them fall. They deserve it. So this is wild. Percentage of Americans who say they have a great deal little or quite a lot of confidence in newspapers and television news. I mean, we are like sub 20% here. We're 16% for newspaper and 11% for television news. I mean, that is abysmal confidence in that. I mean, unbelievable. Follow up on the earlier discussion about the SEC and the supposed big victory they have that they can just go to court now. This is from Jake Chervinsky. We're lucky to have IM Paul Grewal leading such a crucial case for Coinbase and the entire industry. For the non-lawyers, we look forward to uncovering more about the SEC's internal views and discussions. Roughly translates to, we're about to light them up in discovery. I think that it is important. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and it's important that we get some accountability here. And I think that Coinbase is going to wipe the floor with the SEC in this case. And the SEC is going to have another L after wasting tons of taxpayer money. Today, the court decided that our SEC case will move forward on most of the claims, but dismissed the claims against Coinbase Wallet. We were prepared for this, and we look forward to uncovering more about the SEC's internal views and discussions on crypto regulation. Early motions like ours against a government agency are almost always denied, but clarity is the ultimate goal, and today's decision continues us on that path. While we continue to this process and any necessary appeals, we encourage Congress to build on the momentum we saw last year to advance comprehensive digital asset legislation in the U.S. This is critical if we want innovation to remain in the U.S. We also appreciate the court's understanding that technology innovations like Coinbase Wallet do not and cannot implicate U.S. securities laws. Looking ahead, we remain confident in our legal arguments. We look forward to proving we're right. We are eager for the opportunity to take discovery from the SEC for the first time, and we appreciate the court's continued consideration of our case. You can read the full decision for yourself here. Let's move along here to Brian Armstrong. I saw this morning, and this what made me laugh. Brian Armstrong, great progress on the SEC case and huge win for self-custodial wallets. This ensures the on-chain ecosystem will continue to innovate and create economic freedom around the world. We'll continue fighting for your right to use crypto and to get clarity around the rules until the job is done. He's kind of talking about the Coinbase dismissal here, about how they dismissed the case specifically against the Coinbase wallet, but the rest of the stuff will just go to court. I mean, it's just going to be heard in court. FBI just got called out on a community note on X. Congress, take note. FISA 702 has been used for warrantless surveillance of U.S. citizens hundreds of thousands of times, yet FBI demands 702 be reauthorized by April 19th without a warrant requirement for searches of U.S. citizens. Just absolutely disgusting what is happening with these intelligence agencies. Again, it's a direct violation of the Constitution, right? I understand that might make their job a little harder. I sympathize with that point of view that, hey, there's got to be a trade-off, right? We've got the Constitution, and that is the supreme law of the land, and it's not always easier. Sometimes we are trading security and safety for our freedoms, right? Those things can sometimes conflict, right? But the choice of America, and when the Constitution was created, the whole foundation of our society was built on our constitutional freedoms, whether they make us safer or not. I mean, I think that it's a direct attack when those freedoms are being violated. It's not an excuse to violate those freedoms and violate the Constitution just because it may make things safer or may potentially, right? But the problem is also that these things get abused. According to this community note, when the Fourth Amendment rights have been violated 278,000 times with illegal unauthorized FISA searches, right? We saw this FISA stuff weaponized against Donald Trump in the previous election cycle with all this, what turned out to be complete lies. It was all lies. They fabricated evidence. They used this FISA search and did all this stuff. I mean, it's just a bunch of bullshit. And it's got to stop. Hopefully we will have some politicians who can stem the flow of this and return more power to the people and stop the ever-growing power of the federal government. You know, where we're headed now is authoritarianism, and it's not looking pretty. Here's a post from Pomp. Again, the government printing trillions of dollars out of thin airs to respond to emergencies. The US dollar has lost 25% of its purchasing power since January 2020. Every $1 you had is now worth 75 cents of goods. Insane. When we look at inflation and we look at how much inflation has occurred, you know, they're doing this thing where they look at it and it's like, 3%, 4%, whatever per month. Goods are still inflating at that rate, right? So even if it goes from 4% down to 3%, still inflating by 3% every month. It's not like the cost of goods are going down. The inflation is just not occurring as quickly. And this is what happens when you print trillions. The economy isn't real. It's propped up by record debt. They will fake it till they break it. Gross issuance of U.S. treasuries quarterly since COVID. Bonds, notes, bills. And again, this just emphasizes the massive expansion of the monetary supply. Just in, Bitcoin sell-side liquidity just reached an all-time low relative to the demand. Are you prepared? Very interesting here. So this is showing how much Bitcoin is really available here, how much is still left on exchanges and can be easily purchased. And you're looking at the demand of the Bitcoin that's being accumulated and being purchased. It's very simple. It's Econ 101. Why is price near all-time highs? Well, it's supply and demand. It's really not that much more complicated. Biology here says proof of slur. In China, if you can talk about Tiananmen Square, you can prove you're not a state-controlled AI. In fact, if you can even send 89.64 RMB, you can prove the state doesn't control that payment platform. That's because this speech is taboo in China. Amazing. You can't transfer a specific amount, 6.4 RMB or 89.64 RMB via WeChat now, due to politically sensitive June 4th. The equivalent for the West is a slur. If an AI model can say a slur, it's not under state control. And if you can put that slur on chain, that blockchain platform isn't under state control. That's because this speech is taboo in the West. And that's why I fundamentally disagree with Polonia's post below. The presence of speech we detest is the litmus test for freedom. This whole idea of we need to censor, this is misinformation, all this stuff is a bunch of fucking bullshit. The whole idea of free speech is the fact that people can say things you don't like or you don't agree with or, might just be incorrect. Without that freedom, you really don't have the freedom, right? And yes, people can say bad things. Put another way, I think there are sufficient people in every minority group that would be okay with unkind speech about them on chain in return for a hard guarantee that no state, no matter how powerful, can ever seize their funds, censor their speech, or unwind their transactions. Better to be called a bad word than to become a government slave. Love this. Chamath Palihapitiya, boats that can't float, planes that can't fly. The basic infrastructure that America relies on is profoundly dated and broken. If we diverted even a fraction of the annual budget for actual infrastructure and sensible adoption of technology, it would be a boon for safety and the U.S. economy. Instead, rampant graft and boondoggle programs waste billions with boats taking down bridges and flying off planes mid-flight. Couldn't agree more, right? Instead, we're seeing the opposite, at least in our industry. In Web3, in the crypto space, we are seeing the actual opposite of this. We're seeing an attack on technology, an attack on, new stuff, attack on the crypto industry. And we're seeing it come from the government that we are funding with our tax bills, right? Which is just insanity to me. It blows my mind that, my tax dollars are going to fund the SEC for lying in court, for, basically committing perjury, for abusing their power, and for continuing to attack my industry. I mean, it's the fact that this is going on is literally absurd. Just in, MicroStrategy has now surpassed eBay to become the 280th largest company in the US. The Bitcoin effect. You're seeing the value of MicroStrategy climb. It's a profitable software business. And again, like I mentioned before, I am a holder of this stock, and they also have Bitcoin that they're continuing to add to their balance sheet. In the short term, who knows what could happen, right? In the long term, I think it's a valuable acquisition, a valuable diversification to have MicroStrategy as part of your portfolio. Fiat Hawk, let's look at this. So gold miner Neelam Resources is up 1,900% today after they announced to buy 24,800 Bitcoin. This is a wild story. Looks like this is some kind of penny stock. I'd be very careful with this. And Fiat Hawk here says, this is what happens with pumps and dumps. They are obviously worth zero. But if you are a stubborn short and focus on the fundamentals and short it too early, then you can get killed. This will go back to where it came from. It is not MicroStrategy stock. Stay far away if you are not an experienced trader because you will just get hurt. I do agree with that sentiment. Who knows what's real? Who knows if they're actually going to buy the Bitcoin? I mean, who knows? I don't know anything about this company, and I would just be very skeptical and very careful with investing in things like this. Now, if you do your due diligence and do your research and look at everything, and you feel strongly about it, then proceed. But if you're not going to take the time to do that, don't recommend jumping into stuff like this. Just be careful. It's better to be safe than sorry. Here's an interesting post from Brian Armstrong. And if we look at the history of different asset classes, so we're looking at asset class total return since 2011, data via Y charts as of 3/22/24. So when we look at this, we look at, and gives us a little bit over about a decade and a half, about 13, 14 years. And you can see Bitcoin's return in that time frame. We've got 3 years in the red, with the remainder time. If you look at the cumulative view of Bitcoin, obviously you can see that it is the best performing asset in human history. And let's move over here for the cumulative annualized return, right? So nothing has beaten Bitcoin over that time span. We are up cumulatively, I want to say, over 21 million%. I think that's kind of look at that. That's kind of poetic, right? 21 million Bitcoin. And since inception, we're up over right around 21 million%. Gotta love that. Let's move on. Another post from Simply Bitcoin here. In just 30 days, 59,514 Bitcoin have been taken off Coinbase, reducing their holdings to 327,812 Bitcoin. This is a 9-year low. So if we look here at how Bitcoin is coming off and how the demand is going up and the price is going up, this is just, again, supply and demand, right? I'm very curious, as Bitcoin continues to flow off of these exchanges, what's going to happen to the price? Well, when supply is reduced and demand is up, you have a price increase, right? And when the halving occurs in about 30 days, you're going to have another supply shock to the system. So we're going to see something play out this halving cycle that we haven't seen for a while. We've seen Bitcoin make an all-time high before the halving has even occurred. I think this is probably the last halving, maybe this one and the next one, where the supply reduction will make a very large impact because most of the supply is already out there. But as many people know, miners largely have to sell those coins. Not all of them, some of them can hold, but even me personally, when I mine, I need to pay the bills, right? So you have to pay your electrical costs, you have to pay your contractors, you have to pay your subscriptions, you have to pay your services. And then, the rest, of course, you can hold in Bitcoin if you'd like, right? Pay your taxes, etc. And then you can hold whatever's left, you can hold in Bitcoin if you'd like. But a lot of that does have to get sold. This is the cost of production, right? There's a cost associated, a real proof of work and a cost associated with that production of that asset. Finally, a quick little clip from Chainlink, which is another asset that I'm bullish on and I think is a good project. And this is Sergey Nazarov. He kind of just talks a little bit about tokenization and oracles. It's an Oracle project. So full disclosure, big Chainlink fan. And we can see here, Chainlink is the decentralized computing platform powering the verifiable web. This is interesting. And I think Chainlink has a lot more implications with TradFi and with getting real data and things on chain, right? So we're taking real data from the real world about what's happening and executing and helping and plugging that data onto blockchains, right? That's what an Oracle is. So let's listen to this.
The types of assets that I think are most attractive for tokenization in the capital markets are carbon credits, fund tokenization, real estate tokenization, private equity tokenization, and maybe some other esoteric things like something around cash flows. Those are the main things that I'm seeing get the most adoption and traction from how people are trying to use real world assets and tokenization to reinvent the capital markets.
So this is extremely interesting. I've spoken to a lot of people who thought that a lot of this tokenization was going to potentially occur on private blockchains, or some of it may occur on more private or more centralized blockchains, but do not sleep on Ethereum and these publicly decentralized blockchains, because that's where the action is. And that's where most people want to be. And BlackRock, and again, we haven't spoken about this yet. This is the one topic we haven't touched on, but I was saving it for the end here when we talk about tokenization. BlackRock on chain. So BlackRock has created a fund with Securitize, a big player in real world asset tokenization. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink said in an interview earlier that the company's filings for spot Bitcoin and Ether ETFs were stepping stones towards tokenization. BlackRock has created a fund called the BlackRock USD Institutional Digital Liquidity Fund, according to a document filed with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The fund, incorporated in the British Virgin Islands, will be launched in partnership with asset tokenization firm Securitize. The filing does not reveal what assets the fund will hold, but Securitize's presence potentially suggests the product has something to do with the tokenization of real-world assets, or RWA, industry jargon for representing ownership of a wide range of assets through a token on a blockchain. After BlackRock's filing came out, Ondo Finance's native token Ondo jumped as much as 20% and is up 12% over the past 24 hours, outperforming the broad market's CoinDesk 20 index and Bitcoin. Ondo runs a RWA platform, and we've spoken about RWA before, real-world assets, and how that may be a narrative in the upcoming bull cycle. The fact that they launched this first tokenized fund on Ethereum, right? They could have launched it on a different blockchain. They could have launched it on a private blockchain. So they called it, instead of build, it's BIDL. But they decided that they were going to do this on Ethereum. It's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek reference to HODL, which is sort of like a guy was trying to say hold, and it's kind of like a Bitcoin inside joke. So they called it, instead of build, it's BIDL. It is interesting that they chose to launch this fund and issue it on chain on Ethereum, which is a decentralized blockchain instead of a private one. So pay attention, because we're going to see a lot of activity. We're going to see a lot of things tokenized and brought on chain as time goes on. Guys, it's been real. It's been fun. It's been real fun. Thank you for listening today. Stay safe, stay blessed, never stop learning, and keep an open mind. Thanks for listening.